双语音标领航，注音阅读启蒙，叶兴阳有声读物。
Andre Cornelis by Paul Bourget. The Lock and Key Library. The Most Interesting Stories of All Nations. Edited by Julian Hawthorne. French Novels. Table of Contents. Victor Cherbuliez, Count Costia. Paul Bourget, Andre Cornelis. Anonymous, the last of the Costellos, Lady Betty's indiscretion. Victor Cherbuliez. Count Costia. At the beginning of the summer of 1850, a Russian nobleman, Count Kostya Petrovich Lemonov, had the misfortune to lose his wife suddenly, and in the flower of her beauty. She was his junior by 12 years. This cruel loss, for which he was totally unprepared, threw him into a state of profound melancholy, and some months later, seeking to mitigate his grief by the distractions of travel, he left his domains near Moscow, never intending to return. Accompanied by his twin children, 10 years of age, a priest who had served them as tutor, and a serf named Ivan, he repaired to Odessa, and then took passage on a merchant ship for Martinique. Disembarking at St. Pierre, he took lodgings in a remote part of the suburbs. The profound solitude which reigned there did not at first bring the consolation he had sought. It was not enough that he had left his native country. He would have changed the planet itself, and he complained that nature everywhere was too much alike. No locality seemed to him sufficiently a stranger to his experience. And, in the deserted places, where the desperate restlessness of his heart impelled him, he imagined the reappearance of the obtrusive witnesses of his past joys, and of the misfortune by which they were suddenly terminated. He had lived a year in Martinique when the yellow fever carried off one of his children. By a singular reaction in his vigorous temperament, it was about this time that his somber melancholy gave way to a bitter and sarcastic gaiety, more in harmony with his nature. From his early youth he had had a taste for jocularity, a mocking turn of spirit, seasoned by that ironical grace of manner peculiar to the great Muscovite nobleman, and resulting from the constant habit of trifling with men and events. His recovery did not, however, restore the agreeable manners which in former times had distinguished him in his intercourse with the world. Suffering had brought him a leaven of misanthropy, which he did not take the trouble of disguising. His voice had lost its caressing notes and had become rude and abrupt. His actions were brusque, and his smile scornful. Sometimes his bearing gave evidence of a haughty will which, tyrannized over by events, sought to avenge itself upon mankind. Terrible, however, as he sometimes was to those who surrounded him, Count Kostya was yet a civilized devil. So, after a stay of 3 years under tropical skies, he began to sigh for old Europe, and one fine day saw him disembark upon the quays of Lisbon. He crossed Portugal, Spain, the south of France and Switzerland. At Bâle, he learned that on the borders of the Rhine, between Koblenz and Bonn, in a situation quite isolated, an old castle was for sale. To this place he hurried and bought the antique walls and the lands which belonged to them, without discussing the price, and without making a detailed examination of the property. The bargain concluded, he made some hasty and indispensable repairs on one of the buildings which composed a part of his dilapidated manor, and which claimed the imposing name of the fortress of Geierfels, and at once installed himself therein, hoping to pass the rest of his life in peaceable and studious seclusion. Count Kostya was gifted with a quick and ready intellect, which he had strengthened by study. He had always been passionately fond of historical research, but above everything, knew and wished to know only that which the English call the matter of fact. He professed a cold scorn for generalities, and heartily abandoned them to dreamers. He laughed at all abstract theories, and at the ingenuous minds which take them seriously. He held that all system was but logical infatuation, that the only pardonable follies were those which were frankly avowed, and that only a pedant could clothe his imagination in geometrical theories. In general, pedantry to his eyes was the least excusable of vices. He understood it to be the pretension of tracing back phenomena to first causes, as if, said he, there were any first causes, or chance admitted of calculation. This did not prevent him, however, from expending much logic to demonstrate that there was no such thing as logic, either in nature or in man. These are inconsistencies for which skeptics never dream of reproaching themselves. They pass their lives in reasoning against reason. In short, Count Kostia respected nothing but facts, and believed that, properly viewed, there was nothing else, and that the universe, considered as an entirety, was but a collection of contradictory accidents. A member of the Historical and Antiquarian Society of Moscow, he had once published important memoirs upon Slavonic antiquities and upon some of the disputed questions in the history of the Lower Empire. Hardly was he installed at Geierfels, before he occupied himself in fitting up his library, but a few volumes of which he had carried to Martinique. He at once ordered from Moscow most of the books he had left, and also sent large orders to German bookstores. When his seraglio, as he called it, was nearly complete, he again became absorbed in study, and particularly in that of the Greek historians of the Byzantine Empire, of whose collective works he had the good fortune to possess the Louvre edition in 36 volumes folio, and he soon formed the ambitious project of writing a complete history of that empire from Constantine the Great to the taking of Constantinople. So absorbed did he become in this great design, that he scarcely ate or drank, but the further he advanced in his researches, the more he became dismayed by the magnitude of the enterprise, and he conceived the idea of procuring an intelligent assistant, upon whom he could shift a part of the task. As he proposed to write his voluminous work in French, it was in France this living instrument which he needed must be sought, and he therefore broached the project to Dr. Lérens, one of his old acquaintances in Paris. For nearly 3 years, he wrote to the doctor, I have dwelt in a veritable owl's nest, and I should be much obliged to you if you would procure for me a young night bird, who could endure life 2 or 3 years in such an ugly hole without dying of ennui. Understand me, I must have a secretary who is not contented with writing a fine hand and knowing French a little better than I do. I wish him to be a consummate philologist, and a Hellenist of the first order, one of those men who ought to be met with in Paris, born to belong to the Institute, but so dependent upon circumstances as to make that position impossible. If you succeed in finding this priceless being, I will give him the best room in my castle and a salary of 12,000 francs. I stipulate that he shall not be a fool. As to character, I say nothing about it. He will do me the favor to have such as will suit me. Lérens was intimate with a young man from Lorraine named Gilbert Saville, a savant of great merit, who had left Nancy several years before to seek his fortune in Paris. At the age of 27 he had presented, in a competition opened by the Academy of Inscriptions, an essay on the Etruscan language, which took the prize and was unanimously declared a masterpiece of sagacious erudition. He had hoped for some time that this first success, which had gained him renown among learned men, would aid him in obtaining some lucrative position and rescue him from the precarious situation in which he found himself. Nothing resulted from it. His merits compelled esteem. The charm of his frank and courteous manner won him universal goodwill. His friends were numerous. He was well received and caressed. He even obtained, without seeking it, the entrée to more than one salon, where he met men of standing who could be useful to him and assure him a successful future. All this, however, amounted to nothing, and no position was offered. What worked most to his prejudice was an independence of opinion and character which was a part of his nature. Only to look at him was to know that such a man could not be tied down, and the only language which this able philologist could not learn was the jargon of society. Add to this that Gilbert had a speculative, dreamy temperament and the pride and indolence, which are its accessories. To bestir himself and to importune were torture to him. A promise made to him could be forgotten with impunity, for he was not the man to revive it. And besides, as he never complained himself, No one was disposed to complain for him. In short, among those who had been desirous of protecting and advancing him, it was said, "What need has he of our assistance? Such remarkable talent will make its own way." Others thought, without expressing it, "Let us be guarded. This is another Latron. Once foot in the stirrup, God only knows where he will stop." Others said and thought, "This young man is charming. He is so discreet, not like such and such a person." All those cited as not discreet were provided for. The difficulties of his life had rendered Gilbert serious and reflective, but they had neither hardened his heart nor quenched his imagination. He was too wise to revolt against his fate, but determined to be superior to it. "Thou art all thou canst be," said he to himself, "but do not flatter thyself that thou hast reached the measure of my aspirations." After having read M. Lemanoff's letter, Dr. Laurens went in search of Gilbert. He described Count Kostia to him according to his remote recollections, but he asked him, before deciding, to weigh the matter deliberately. After quitting his young friend, he muttered to himself, "After all, I hope he will refuse. He would be too much of a prize for that boyard. Of his very Muscovite face, I remember only an enormous pair of eyebrows, the loftiest and bushiest I ever saw, and perhaps there is nothing more of him. There are men who are all in the eyebrows." 2. A week later Gilbert was on his way to Geierfels. At Cologne, he embarked on board a steamboat to go up the Rhine 10 or 12 leagues beyond Bonn. Towards evening, a thick fog settled down upon the river and its banks, and it became necessary to anchor during the night. This mischance rendered Gilbert melancholy, finding in it, as he did, an image of his life. He too had a current to stem, and more than once a sad and somber fog had fallen and obscured his course. In the morning the weather cleared, they weighed anchor, and at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Gilbert disembarked at a station 2 leagues from Geierfels. He was in no haste to arrive, and even though born with a ready-made consolation for anything, as M. Laurens sometimes reproachfully said to him, he dreaded the moment when his prison doors should close behind him, and he was disposed to enjoy yet a few hours of his dear liberty. "We are about to part," said he to himself. "Let us at least take time to say farewell." Instead of hiring a carriage to transport himself and his effects, he consigned his trunk to a porter, who engaged to forward it to him the next day, and took his way on foot, carrying under his arm a little valise, and promising himself not to hurry. An hour later, he quitted the main road, and stopped to refresh himself at an humble inn situated upon a hillock covered with pine trees. Dinner was served to him under an arbor. His repast consisted of a slice of smoked ham and an omelette au surfuel, which he washed down with a little good claret. This feast à la Jean Jacques appeared to him delicious, flavored as it was by that freedom of the inn which was dearer to the author of the Confessions than even the freedom of the press. When he had finished eating, Gilbert ordered a cup of coffee, or rather of that black beverage called coffee in Germany. He was hardly able to drink it, and he remembered with longing the delicious mocha prepared by the hands of Madame Laurens, and this set him thinking of that amiable woman and her husband. Gilbert's reverie soon took another turn. From the bank where he was sitting, he saw the Rhine, the tow path which wound along by the side of its grayish waters, and nearer to him the great white road where, at intervals, heavy wagons and post-chaises raised clouds of dust. This dusty road soon absorbed all of his attention. It seemed to him as if it cast tender glances upon him, as if it called him and said, "Follow me. We will go together to distant countries. We will keep the same step night and day and never weary. We will traverse rivers and mountains, and every morning we will have a new horizon. Come. I wait for thee. Give me thy heart. I am the faithful friend of vagabonds. I am the divine mistress of those bold and strong hearts which look upon life as an adventure." Gilbert was not the man to dream long. He became himself again, rose to his feet, and shook off the vision. Up to this hour I thought myself rational, but it appears I am so no longer. Forward, then. Courage. Let us take our staff and on to Geierfels. As he entered the kitchen of the inn to pay his bill, he found the landlord there busy in bathing a child's face from which the blood streamed profusely. During this operation, the child cried, and the landlord swore. At this moment his wife came in. "What has happened to Wilhelm?" she asked. "What has happened?" replied he angrily. "It happened that when Monsieur Stefan was riding on horseback on the road by the mill, this child walked before him with his pigs. Monsieur Stefan's horse snorted, and Monsieur Stefan, who could hardly hold him, said to the child, 'Now then, little idiot, do you think my horse was made to swallow the dust your pigs raise? Draw aside, drive them into the brush, and give me the road. Take to the woods yourself,' answered the child. 'The path is only a few steps off.' At this Monsieur Stefan got angry, and as the child began to laugh, he rushed upon him and cut him in the face with his whip. 'God a mercy! Let him come back, this little master, and I'll teach him how to behave himself. I mean to tie him to a tree one of these days, and break a dozen faggots of green sticks over his back.' 'Ah, take care what thou sayest, my old Peter,' replied his wife with a frightened air. 'If thou dost touch the little man, thou dost get thyself into a bad business.' 'Who is this Monsieur Stefan?' inquired Gilbert. The landlord, recalled to prudence by the warning of his wife, answered dryly, 'Stefan is Stefan. Priors are priors, and sheep are put into the world to be sheared.' Thus repulsed, poor Gilbert paid 5 or 6 times its value for his frugal repast, muttering as he departed, 'I don't like this Stefan. Is it on his account that I've just been imposed upon? Is it my fault that he carries matters with such a high hand?' Gilbert descended the little hill, and retook the main road. It pleased him no more, for he knew too well where it was leading him. He inquired how much further it was to Geierfels, and was told that by fast walking he would reach that place within an hour, whereupon he slackened his pace. He was certainly in no haste to get there. Gilbert was but a half a league from the castle when, upon his right, a little out of his road, he perceived a pretty fountain which partly veiled a natural grotto. A path led to it, and this path had for Gilbert an irresistible attraction. He seated himself upon the margin of the fountain, resting his feet upon a mossy stone. This ought to be his last halt, for night was approaching. Under the influence of the bubbling waters, Gilbert resumed his dreamy soliloquy. But his meditations were presently interrupted by the sound of a horse's feet which clattered over the path. Raising his eyes, he saw coming towards him, mounted upon a large chestnut horse, a young man of about 16, whose pale thin face was relieved by an abundance of magnificent bright brown hair, which fell in curls upon his shoulders. He was small but admirably formed, and his features, although noble and regular, awakened in Gilbert more of surprise than sympathy. Their expression was hard, sullen, and sad, and upon this beautiful face not any of the graces of youth appeared. The young cavalier came straight towards him, and when at a step or two from the fountain, he called out in German, with an imperious voice, 'My horse is thirsty. Make room for me.' 'My good man.' Gilbert did not stir. 'You take a very lofty tone, my little friend,' replied he in the same language, which he understood very well, but pronounced like the devil. 'I mean like a Frenchman. My tall friend, how much do you charge for your lessons in etiquette?' answered the young man in the same language, imitating Gilbert's pronunciation. Then he added in French, with irreproachable purity of accent, 'Come. I can't wait. Move quicker.' And he began cutting the air with his riding whip. 'Stefan,' said Gilbert, who had not forgotten the adventure of the little Wilhelm, 'your whip will get you into trouble some of these days.' 'Who gave you the right to know my name?' cried the young man, raising his head haughtily. 'The name is already notorious through the country,' retorted Gilbert, and you have written it in very legible characters upon the cheek of a little pig driver. Stefan, for it was he, reddened with anger and raised his whip with a threatening air. But with a blow of his stick Gilbert sent it flying into the bottom of a ditch, 20 paces distant. When he looked at the young man again, he repented of what he had done, for his expression was terrible to behold. His pallor became livid, all the muscles of his face contracted, and his body was agitated by convulsive movements. In vain he tried to speak. His voice died upon his lips, and reason seemed deserting him. He tore off one of his gloves, and tried to throw it in Gilbert's face, but it fell from his trembling hand. For an instant he looked with a scornful and reproachful glance at that slender hand whose weakness he cursed. Then tears gushed in abundance from his eyes. He hung his head over the neck of his horse, and in a choking voice murmured, "For the love of God, if you do not wish me to die of rage, give me back. Give me back." He could not finish, but Gilbert had already run to the ditch, and having picked up the riding whip, as well as the glove, returned them to him. Stefan, without looking at him, answered by a slight inclination of the head, but kept his eyes fixed upon the pommel of his saddle, evidently striving to recover his self-possession. Gilbert, pitying his state of mind, turned to leave, but at the moment he stooped to pick up his portmanteau and cane, the youth, with a well-directed blow of his whip, struck off his hat, which rolled into the ditch, and when Gilbert, surprised and indignant, was about to throw himself upon the young traitor, he had already pushed his horse to a full gallop, and in the twinkling of an eye he reached the main road, where he disappeared in a whirlwind of dust. Gilbert was much more affected by this adventure than his philosophy should have permitted. He took up his journey again with a feeling of depression, and haunted by the pale, distorted face of the youth. "This excess of despair," said he to himself, "indicates a proud and passionate character. But the perfidy with which he repaid my generosity is the offspring of a soul ignoble and depraved." And striking his forehead, he continued, "It just occurs to me, judging from his name, that this young man may be Count Kostia's son. Ah, what an amiable companion I shall have to cheer my captivity. Lemanoff ought to have forewarned me. It was an article which should have been included in the contract." Gilbert felt his heart sink. He saw himself already condemned to defend his dignity incessantly against the caprices and insolence of a badly trained child. The prospect was not attractive. Plunged in these melancholy reflections, he lost his way, having passed the place where he should have quitted the main road to ascend the steep hill of which the castle formed the crown. By good luck, he met a peasant who put him again upon the right track. The night had already fallen when he entered the court of the vast building. This great assemblage of incongruous structures appeared to him but a somber mass whose weight was crushing him. He could only distinguish one or two projecting towers whose pointed roofs stood out in profile against the starlit sky. While seeking to make out his position, several huge dogs rushed upon him, and would have torn him to pieces if,